and the state. So I'm gonna do a mix of Greek and English in moderation today. My co-speakers are gonna speak in English. So we can begin. Να παρουσιάσω πρώτα λίγο το πολύ ενδιαφέρον πάνελ που έχουμε μαζί μας, τις συνομιλητριές μας. Είναι η κυρία Καρίνα Παπιάνη. Η Καρίνα είναι διευθύνουσα γραμματέας στο Κλάσκο. Το Κλάσκο είναι το Λατινοαμερικάνικο Συμβούλιο Κοινωνικών Επιστημών. Είναι επίσης τακτική καθηγήτρια και ερευνήτρια στη Σχολή Κοινωνικών Επιστημών του Πανεπιστημίου της Δημοκρατίας της Ουρουάης. Η Αρκίτσα Τσάκαντιτς είναι αναπληρώτρια καθηγήτρια στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Ζάγκρεπ και μέλος της Επιτροπής των Επιμελητών των Απάτων της Ρόζας Λούξεμπουργκ, Βέρσο, και βεβαίως η Αγγελική Δροκίτη, η οποία είναι διδάκτορας κοινωνιολογίας του Πανεπιστημίου του Παρισιού και επίσης μεταδιδακτορική ερευνήτρια στο τμήμα κοινωνιολογίας του Πανεπιστημίου της Κρήτης. Σήμερα η συζήτηση, όπως ανέφερα και νωρίτερα, αφορά μια πολύ κομβική όψη της υπόθεσης της δύσκολης και ταραχώδους σχέσης της αριστεράς με το κράτος, τόσο από θεωρητική όσο και από πολιτική σκοπιά. Η μαρξιστική φεμινιστική θεωρία και πολιτική έχουν συνεισφέρει με πολλά αναλυτικά εργαλεία για τη μορφή του κράτους και για το ρόλο του ως χαρακτήρα και πεδίου διεκδίκησης και για τους τρόπους και τους δρόμους για την υπέρβασή του. Σε αντίστοιξη προς το ρεύμα του φιλελεύθερου φεμινισμού, που αντιμετωπίζει το κράτος ως ένα πεδίο για την επιδίωξη μερικών παραχωρήσεων, ή ακόμη και πιο συγκεκριμένα για την εισαγωγή μεταρρυθμίσεων που μετριάζουν ή επανορθώνουν τις κοινωνικές και έμφυλες ανισότητες, ο μαρξιστικός φεμινισμός προσεγγίζει το κράτος με έμφαση στη διαπλοκή ταξικών συσχετισμών δύναμης και των δομικών έμφυλων ανισοτήτων. Με χαρακτήριο την πολύ περιβαλλοντική σύνθετη και ιστορικά φορτισμένη σχέση της αριστεράς και του κινήματος στο κράτος, θα επιδιώξουμε σήμερα να προσεγγίσουμε όψεις αυτής της σχέσης από τη σκοπιά του φεμινισμού και βεβαίως θα το κάνουμε αυτό λαμβάνοντας υπόψη τόσο τις εμπειρίες από τα σύγχρονα επιδραστικά, πολιτικά και κοινωνικά κινήματα, αλλά βέβαια και την τρέχουσα συγκυρία με την διαπλοκή. Και την τρέχουσα συγκυρία, που μιλάω για την ώρα, με τη διαπλοκή της κοινωνικής, οικονομικής και περιβαλλοντικής κρίσης. Αυτά τα πολύ λίγα από μένα εισαγωγικά. Μία πολύ σύντομη αναφορά στη διαδικασία της κουβέντας. Θα γίνει σε 2 γύρους. We'll have 2 rounds of questions. I think this is the way that things were done yesterday. Στους 2 κύκλους ερωτήσεων θα απευθύνω μία σκέψη, μία ερώτηση σε κάθε ομιλήτρια, διαφορετική για την καθεμία, και ελπίζουμε ότι στο τέλος θα υπάρχει και λίγος χρόνος για συζήτηση. Σίγουρα θα υπάρξει, γιατί το θέμα είναι πολύ ενδιαφέρον. Οπότε, ακολουθώντας και τη σειρά του προγράμματος, θα ξεκινήσω με την Καρίνα Παπιάνη. Καρίνα, μου επιτρέπει. Η πρώτη σκέψη, όπως το καταλαβαίνουμε, με ποιους τρόπους θεωρείς, Καρίνα, ότι οι φεμινιστικοί αγώνες στη Λατινική Αμερική έχουν συμβάλει καθοριστικά σε διαδικασίες πολιτικού μετασχηματισμού και εμβάθυνσης της δημοκρατίας? Νομίζω ότι λαμβάνοντας υπόψη και το πόσο επιδραστικό είναι και το παράδειγμα των φεμινιστικών κινημάτων στη Λατινική Αμερική τα τελευταία χρόνια σε παγκόσμια κλίμακα, έχει πολύ μεγάλο ενδιαφέρον να ακούσουμε αυτή την οπτική της Καρίνα.
Thank you. So, afternoon, good morning, good Saturday for everyone, and thank you very much for inviting once again Claxo to be part of this conference Thanks especially to the Nikos Poulantzas Institute and obviously to Alice for organizing this conference, and obviously to Connie and Marga from Transform for inviting us to be here. We participated also in Prague last year in the conference, and it was really a good experience, so we are very happy to be here once again. Let's start. Obviously, I say hello to all the panelists here. Antika, Angeliki, and Aliki, all with A. I'm the only without an A in my name. I will start with this issue of the feminist perspective on the state. Obviously, this perspective varies depending on the specific feminist theory that we are looking to. I will not enter here in a discussion between the different feminist perspective from a theoretical point of view, but I want to start saying that one common or two common points around in this theoretical perspective is that we can affirm that the state are obviously patriarchal institutions. We have to take into account this, and obviously that the state are responsible for upholding and also enforcing gender inequality through laws, policies, and practice. I think this is nowadays an evident fact, but we have to refresh it and to rename it many times. As many feminists have already said, I also say that when I look at the state appears male to me. So how to address this challenge from a feminist perspective, how to combine this challenge from a feminist and a left perspective. Maybe there we have the biggest challenge. I will give a little Latin American context to address these questions as the moderator posed before. In the current Latin America political moment, one of the relative new things in the agenda is the relevance of the issues related to women as a specific social group, to gender relations, and to LGBTQ plus population. Unlike years ago, all governments in Latin America, without exception, have spoken out about these issues as part of their primary policy. Discourses, programs, and practices regarding human sexual and reproductive rights, same-sex marriage, wage gaps, political representation, care, parity in political life, the fight against violence, gender-based violence, etc., are central to defining the conservative, authoritarian, or the progressive characteristic of the governments in Latin America. This is really a crucial issue in the agenda where we can look and define the characteristic of the different governments that we have nowadays in Latin America. The intensity of the conflict and the quality of alliance between the right vary from one country to another in Latin America, but also in all the world. But it is a constant that the democratization of gender relations remain a high-intensity conflict. Therefore, in some contexts, feminist action is being one of resistance, that is to say, not losing conquered rights more than advancing in new ones, but we have in other cases in Latin America that it is possible to have a more proactive action, even with some narrow margins. Another important challenge is to produce increasingly comprehensive and inclusive feminist agendas that connect with the critique of Latin American development models, inequalities, the current state of the capitalist cycle, and process of racialization and marginalization of specific community. That's really one of the challenge that we are facing in Latin America from a theoretical point of view. This is the guarantee that the agenda will reach complexity, political density, and relate demands for recognition and political representation, obviously also with the redistributive demands. The presence of fundamentalist religious force with an explicit anti-gender agenda complicates the landscape in our region and increases the tension in the political conflict in the street, but also in the institutions. The crusade against gender ideology is one of the most important obstacles to feminist and feminist and women's movement in Latin America and the Caribbean. But the feminist movement has in favor that they are the most vital political field in the global conjuncture. They are producing global popular articulations like no other political actor in the region, and that they are politicizing a comprehensive and articulated agenda for all the Latin America and the Caribbean region. One example could be that in November, that is to say in 2 months, we will have the EFLAC, the Latin American Encuentro Feminista Latinoamericano y Caribeño, Latin American
Encounter
Summit, a feminist summit, and there all the different expression of movements, feminist movement in Latin America will join together, discuss and produce some common agenda and articulated agenda for the future. The feminist movement also have on their side the weight of questions, and this is for me really important, the weight of questions that the right and part of the traditional left have relegated to the background. For instance, how to sustain and reproduce social and individual life. Obviously, it has to do with the reproductive question and with the care agenda. Who is responsible for this? What does it imply? How to make the life we live more equitable, more free, and more democratic. That is to say, we have to focus on the political dimension of everyday life, and there the care agenda is in the center. Another example is that we have nowadays almost 20 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean that are discussing care policies, how to develop care policies in Latin America, in the different countries. So we have these and other questions that organized movement and feminists continue to politicize all areas of existence from the ground up. This is where their radically democratic potential lies. We really believe that the feminist movement has a radically democratic potential, in the conviction that democracy does not exist without full equality and without considering this political dimension of everyday life. So the big question is, why it's so difficult to integrate feminists in the state, but also why it's so difficult to integrate feminists in left movements and parties? Why it's so difficult for the left parties and the left movement to say clear and loud, we are feminists? Now this is also a discussion in different parties, left parties in Latin America, and it is really almost impossible that they declare themselves as feminists. For me, it is like a contradiction. You cannot be, or you cannot position yourself from a left perspective without positioning yourself from a feminist perspective. Why? I think it is obvious for all of you, but I will only mention 3 or 4 things, 3 or 4 examples. The first one is obviously the intersectional view of inequality. That is one of the, how do you say about this? That is contribution, gracias. This is one of the contributions of the feminist movements, the intersectional view of inequality. Second, the critical view of the sexual division of labor. This is our main theoretical category, and obviously it affects everything that we want to study. Third, care. Care now is in the center, or must be in the center, because of this everyday perspective of life that I mentioned before. Then, for the work of the feminist movement around the reproductive rights, that is very important in Latin America. Then the way that feminists address the structural discrimination, and now here I come back to this intersectional perspective, of this intersectional way of addressing, for instance, inequality. In conclusion, I must say that a feminist left, or a left feminist, how you want to mention it, is necessary to address inequality, specifically gender inequality, but also social inequalities in a comprehensive and effective way, recognizing the different dimensions of oppressions that we have in our society, and fighting for equities in all areas of society. Only through this committed alliance between left and feminist, we can build a better future with more democracy, more inclusion, more equity, and so on. This is one of the challenge that I think we must discuss in a meeting like this. Thank you.
Μας έδωσε και πολύ ωραία σύνδεση τώρα η Καρίνα με την απάντησή της. Προχωράμε λοιπόν με την Άγγιτσα. Μιας και αναφέρθηκε τώρα και έτσι η αναβαθμισμένη σημασία των θεμάτων της φροντίδας και το πώς, ας πούμε, έχουν μπει στο πεδίο της πολιτικής. Θα ήθελα να ρωτήσω την Άγγιτσα και με αφορμή το πολύ ενδιαφέρον κείμενο της, το οποίο περιλαμβάνεται στο Transform Yearbook, Who Cares, Neoliberalism, Formal Labor, Life Making, να μοιραστεί μαζί μας κάποιες σκέψεις, δεν ξέρω, ίσως και μια, ας πούμε, πολιτική και όχι μόνο θεωρητική ερμηνεία, γιατί έχει αποκτήσει ξανά τόσο ενδιαφέρον για την αριστερά και τα κινήματα η θεωρία της κοινωνικής αναπαραγωγής, που δεν είναι και μια νέα, ας πούμε, φεμινιστική προσέγγιση. Έχει την καταγωγή της στις αρχές της δεκαετίας του 80, η Λις πολλές άλλες φεμινίστριες, μαρξίστριες ασχολήθηκαν με αυτό το το αντικείμενο. Οπότε νομίζω ότι ήταν πολύ χρήσιμο να μας πει η Άκητσα, γιατί κατά τη γνώμη της αυτή η προσέγγιση αποκτά μια επικαιρότητα και μια πολιτική χρησιμότητα σήμερα.
Thank you, Aliki, for your great question. And before I proceed with sharing some of my thoughts on social production theory, allow me just to briefly thank Kimon, Angelina, Haris, and all the others from Transform Conference organizational team, especially the Yearbook team, for initially inviting me to provide the mentioned piece and eventually welcoming me here in Athens. So my plan is to actually share several thoughts that I developed in the mentioned text from the current volume of Transform Yearbook. And in my first part, I will talk more about theory and social reproduction. And in the second round, I'll do some data and maybe more practical information. So yes, absolutely, there is a growing interest in the social reproduction theory, especially in the last 10 years. I would even argue that social reproduction theory is one of the most fruitful Marxist currents in contemporary Marxism. I will try to explain why I think so by making some theoretical and methodological remarks on social reproduction theory, but I also want to take a brief detour to sketch a provisional scheme of historical development of social reproduction theory. So basically, SRT, social reproduction theory, departs from a Marxist understanding of reproduction within the capitalist mode of production, but expounds on Marx's theoretical sketch and redirects the analysis from the logic of capital toward labor power. Shortly, it poses the question, if workers' labor produces all the wealth of society, who then produces the worker? Social reproduction theory is a necessary instrument for an analysis of reproductive labor within neoliberalism. After the 2008 crisis, left analysis, especially historical materialist one, needed a tool to help us analyze the logic of neoliberalism, its fetish on entrepreneurial individualism, and the reasons of elimination of the public and communal institution and rights. At the same time, Marxists needed a kind of an update, especially with regard to the phenomena such as feminization of labor, feminization of migration, gender and racial oppression, reproductive labor and the role of the family in the reproduction of current capitalism. Every time capitalism goes into new crisis, social reproduction suffers at the same time. Social reproduction theory is important for us because it suggests the following. If you want to talk about contemporary capitalism or the neoliberal state, you have to talk about social reproduction as well. Or to paraphrase Horkheimer in the manual of social reproduction, whoever is not willing to talk about reproductive labor should also remain silent about capitalism or neoliberalism. And to remind ourselves briefly, the neoliberalism is a financialized, predatory and technocratic form of capitalism witnessed in the last 40 years. It seeks to abolish the social obligations of the state and democratic administrative procedures, encouraging austerity politics while advocating a free and unregulated market and by focusing on redefining the form of the state. Speaking from a historical perspective, the neoliberalization of market through the introduction of part-time labor contracts, the flexibilization of labor force and deregulation of labor and welfare legislation are all phenomena relating to the 1970s crisis and stagflation, when the neoliberal regime was partially formalized through women's labor and commodification of domestic labor. The concept of social reproduction contributes to the analysis of capitalism in its totality, to borrow a bit from Lukács, because it integrates both the market and the non-market aspects of capitalism, both on the level of exploitation and the level of oppression. Oppression in the sphere of sexuality, identity, sexual relations, including non-market, everyday routine activities, but also the unproductive sphere, health or education system, for example. Social production theory is all about life-making. Its core tenet is the fact that the accumulation of surplus value is not possible without informal and unpaid labor that generates healthy labor power on 3 levels. And I underline that it's not just about generating labor power. The crucial thing is that we have healthy labor power. So it goes on 3 levels. The first one is the maintenance of direct producers. The second one is by taking care of non-laboring members of subordinate classes, children, the elderly, and the unemployed. And the third level through generational renewal of workers, birth taken for granted as the biological reproduction of new labor force. So when we ask what has led to an increasing interest in social reproduction theory, we have to acknowledge that Marxist feminists have provided answers to many pressing questions about the contemporary capitalist mode of production and neoliberalism that are more complex than usual orthodox Marxist approach offers us. And these specific questions about many of the gender, class, and race-related problems that social reproduction poses for the left and Marxist analysis are the result of serious and committed work that Marxist feminists have been doing continuously since the beginning of the 20th century, at least. In addition, social reproduction theory sharpens the analytical blades we use to make existing theories of labor more thorough, to better understand the historical phenomena of gender and racial division of labor, and to grasp the issue of class and class struggle more precisely. Capitalist societies have separated the social reproduction labor from that of economic reproduction, and have remunerated reproductive activities in the coin of love, virtue, while compensating productive labor in that of money. Since capital needs social reproductive labor to produce and reproduce labor force, it is determined to secure the appropriate amount of this very valuable resource at the lowest possible cost. Neoliberalism does that by informally assigning the responsibility for social reproduction to women, families, and communities. This way, it degrades reproduction to the forms that are more suitable for the maximization of capitalist profit. But let me add something to reference to Lisa Fogel. I'll make it as brief as possible. As I have argued in several of my essays, Marxist feminist approaches to the question of social reproduction vary. And it cannot be claimed that there is one comprehensive theory, one comprehensive social reproduction theory. I actually argue that there are several waves of social reproduction theory, or even strands. For example, the first one I advocated is the early social reproduction theory, which you can already trace in the texts and speeches of communists and feminists such as Clara Zetkin, Rosa Luxemburg, Nadezhda Krupskaya, and Alexandra Kollontai. Then the social reproduction theory of 70s and 80s, usually called autonomist feminism, which is associated with the operaismo and wages for housework campaign, and then the recent unitary strand, which was highlighted in 2013 by the new edition of Vogel's book from 1983, Marxism and the Oppression of Women Toward a Unitary Theory. Also, it is important to take into account that more elaborate discussions of wages for housework and unpaid domestic labor emerged even before wages for housework campaign. First of all, starting with the essay The Political Economy of Women's Liberation by Margaret Bentham from 1969, then the text L'Ennemi Principal by Christine Delphi from 1971, and finally the Donne Sovversione Sociale by Maria Rosa Dalla Costa from 1970. So just after that, and the autonomist feminism, new versions of unitary theory put by Lisa Vogel will appear. In parallel, we also have to acknowledge the emergence of queer and trans-Marxist of social reproduction theory as well. However, also it is important to know that the idea of wages for housework was initially proposed as a concrete social politics by struggles of the welfare rights movement, led mainly by welfare mothers, most of them African American in the 1960s in the United States, and the unsupported mothers in England. Some of these ideas were already articulated in Claudia Jones's seminal 1949 essay, The End, the Neglect of the Problem of the Negro Woman, where she coined the idea of triple oppression of working class black women. So, to wrap it up, social reproduction theory did not just appear out of nowhere or was brought into being by a particular book or author. Rather, it is important to emphasize its collective continuity and collective efforts, whereas a specific feminist idea or a specific feminist movement, social reproduction theory has been around for 100 years, not under that specific name, of course, but mainly as a part of socialist and Marxist feminist critique of capitalist mode of production and the critique of bourgeois feminism. But it has recently become more popular because Marxist feminists framed it and imposed it as one of the most necessary and unavoidable tools in our current struggles against neoliberalism, be it in theory, on the streets, in our kitchens or bedrooms.
Διευρύνοντας μάλλον τις οπτικές της σημερινής κουβέντας και με πολύ μεγάλο ενδιαφέρον και για τη δουλειά που κάνει η Αγγελική για τα θέματα του μιλιταρισμού και τη σύνδεση με την αναπαραγωγή των έμφυλων στερεοτύπων, μια οπτική που θα έλεγα ότι παραγνωρίζεται, είναι κάπως παραγνωρισμένη συχνά στη συζήτηση. Οπότε με αφορμή και αυτή τη δουλειά της Αγγελικής θα ήθελα να τη ρωτήσω αν υπό το πρίσμα αυτής της διεθνούς συγκυρίας, στην οποία παράγονται πάρα πολλοί λόγοι για τον πόλεμο και πιο συγκεκριμένα ίσως και για τους στρατιωτικούς εξοπλισμούς, οι οποίοι προέρχονται τόσο από τα μέσα ενημέρωσης, όσο και από υπερεθνικούς θεσμούς, όπως για παράδειγμα η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση. Οι λόγοι αυτοί αναπαράγουν με πολύ κυρίαρχο τρόπο στερεότυπα για το φύλο, για τη θέση των γυναικών. Ποια είναι λοιπόν κατά τη γνώμη σου, ποια μπορεί να είναι μάλλον η συνεισφορά της φεμινιστικής κριτικής σε αυτούς τους λόγους?
Hello everybody, I'm going to speak in English with a Greek accent and some French. because it's my academic language. First of all, I would like to say that it was a hopeful presentation. I feel like I'm going to drag you down to the misery of militarization. Let's see, I'm going to try to make it a bit more hopeful at the end. And yes, so let's try to do it. So I'm going to try to answer this question. I did my presentation for today in some points. Just to mention a little bit the contributions of feminist approaches of militarization in the armies. So I put 3 levels over there, so it's going to be like from micro from micro to macro level. And then I'm going to start with war, conflicts, peace, and violence, because we are in this situation, as you said. At the same time, it's our European situation. It used to be like that. It's still like that around the globe. Let me know if I'm a really fast speaker. Let me know if it's too much. So it's a new European situation, but there are a lot of states around the globe, and like South countries mostly, who are like since almost always concerned by these questions. So what do feminists do when it comes to war, peace, conflict, and violence? Of course, we have, like, you know that before me, pacifist and anti-militarist movements since World War I, who contributed to explain the domination of male, the participation of male, criticizing highly the question of citizenship. We talked about for nationalism and stuff. That's the basic idea over here. So when it comes to World War I and later World War II, we start criticizing the male domination and the access of citizenship through military service, because it's a male affair. And then again, we're going to find a lot of criticizing and trying to construct new critiques about violence during war, which is supposed to be a weapon. Rape, for example, is considered to be a weapon of war. And then again, it goes back to this nationalist and naturalist, let's say, roots of thinking of the genders and the patriarchy, because the enemy is always a male, but the opposite, the objective of the war is to have into possession the females, who are considered to be the reproduction machines of the new citizens. And then again, when it comes to war, conflicts, and peace, we have criticizing militarized masculinity and patriarchy through the war. The war is considered to be one of the machines who are reproducing these inequalities, but by giving to males the access to the monopoly of violence. I would like to go furthermore maybe later on these perspectives by developing a little bit more about military services around the globe. When we look at each other in the European countries, we would say it was over. I mean, we started having the abolition of military compulsory military service in European countries since the 90s up to 2000s, in order to have this professionalization of the troops. I'm going to stay first with this compulsory military service, and is to say that we have to think again when it comes to questions of equality, gender, communism, or left thinking, to think back again that nowadays we have compulsory military service in Greece. 2001, it was, up to 2001, it was 9 months. It's 12 months now for only males. And then in Ukraine, it started in 2014, Lithuania 15, Sweden 16, Latvia 2023, and in France we already have what we call the universal national service, which is about to be obligatory. Up to now it was like open free bar, whoever wanted to go, and it was used for young people who wanted to add something in their CV if they were excluded from other instructions, international structures, as the universities and so on. So when we look on the feminist perspectives and criticizing the military service, we're looking a little bit closer to these gender relationships being reproduced through that. So of course, as I mentioned before, there is a part of civilians who are not allowed to or not accepted into the barracks, and I'm talking here about, it's only about males on the global. If we look closer, it's only males, and then again, young males, and also healthy ones. And the ones who are excluded are women, whatever age it is, a woman, and then all people who are supposed not to be male enough, like homosexual, trans people, LGBT communities, etc. So this mechanism of military service, which is basically the roots of all the militarism, the militaristic system, goes back to that. And when we look closer, especially the feminist, the Marxist feminist contributions to that, they tend to criticize the engender roles among men, which is like an interesting contribution to do. And I'm going to stop here for 1 minute. So we take women and men, let's take them as two categories, okay? And then we have these monosexual institutions where we can see the reproduction of real men through violence, harassment, and stuff. So this eclectic situation of male being the only ones to be considered as eligible to participate in this socialization in violence, it's a mechanism of reproduction of nationalist and patriotic and patriarchal ideas, because exactly this monopoly. And then, of course, through this situation, we have the result of the gender and heteronormative purification, as the populations I mentioned before, they're not supposed to be considered by this national obligation equals the citizenship, which are either lately in European countries and the other countries around the globe. So the third part is, one of the critics also comes in professionalization. You talked about the feminization of labor before. This is like a nowadays also subject, because from the abolition of military service concerning northern countries, we will see that progressively we accepted or tolerated women's presence in the troops, and then feminists go and look through which conditions and which criteria those women were accepted to be professional military staff. And of course, I mean, if you look closer for the US case, let's talk about the US a little bit. I mean, it's the first one in NATO in terms of budget. We are the third ones. Turkish people in the second place. So welcome to this country. So let's take the US example. When women have been accepted into the barracks as professional, it was not because there was like a progressive way of thinking, let's include this population. It was because they want to include black people and other minorities. So we see also that capitalism works in this idea of inclusion, exclusion, reproducing again new gender hierarchies. So we have to look better on this. I'm thinking about like Cynthia's law work mostly on learning about that. And then we also have to watch a little bit furthermore. You mentioned that before, I like it, about the resistance. What takes so much resistance on institutions, those masculine institutions, to accept females as colleagues, and then criticize the feminist approaches will put some light on conditions of being a professional in the military, talking about harassment, talking about violence, talking about exclusion, and then of course I'm talking not only about the sexual and everyday violence, physical or emotional and psychological we can have, but also the fact that a lot of women are blocked from going up into the hierarchy because of being considered to be women. And then of course, when it comes to that, I mean, you remember I talked before about this long time lasting exclusion of women into the barracks and the violence and war, because they are considered to be the protected population. So we have in this patriarchal system thinking that men, they're supposed to get into the barracks, know more about weapons, know more about violence, and they can use it against the enemy. At the same time, they're protecting another population which is traditionally excluded from that. So the fourth point, I hope you get me, you follow me here, because I'm in my feminist daily right now. We're having like an international relations approach, which takes like in the micro level of the power dynamics among countries, among industries, what's happening when it comes not only the military, well, this is French, I'm really sorry for that, the complex industrial military complex, let's call it like that as I can. So they tend to look upon power and domination dynamics around the globe, about define militarization in different levels. I'm thinking about the example of relocation of shoes industries in the Asian countries while they used to be under military, militarized or states. I remember this example of a woman being working as like cheap labor workers in these industries. They go on strike, and the industry are protected by military people who cooperate with the state. And we're talking about shoes that are like bought and sold in the other part of the globe, the US, the European stuff. So we're trying to do connection between militarization and mondialization. We didn't mention the word yet. Maybe we should come back a little bit to this like, type of mondialization of our ideas or not. And then they look furthermore on ecofeminism, which the consequences of wars and troops lying around the globe, and the consequences of climate crisis, or colonialism and what has been given or taken from people to participate in wars and stuff. Also the militarization of borders. We talked about refugees yesterday again. So this is a question about what we do with military stuff. And then I have to stop by saying that I present something that seems a bit smooth and a little bit like flying over situations. I feel, though, I have to say that a lot of debates, a lot of controversies, a lot of different definitions from one period to the other. And I do think that, as I said before, if we don't take them into account, we will keep reproducing real men by the barracks, by the wars. So we will still reproducing this neoliberal patriarchal system. And I'm going to stop here because I'm going to talk later. Thank you very much.
Οπότε θα έχετε όλες ευκαιρία να συμπληρώσετε και να συνεχίσετε να αναπτύσσετε τις σκέψεις σας. Συνεχίζουμε με την Καρίνα, με την ίδια σειρά που ακολουθήσαμε δηλαδή και στον προηγούμενο κύκλο. Αρχικά σκεφτόμουν όταν κάναμε την προετοιμασία για την κουβέντα εδώ, να ρωτήσω την Καρίνα και λόγω της ερευνητικής της ιδιότητάς της ως ερευνήτρια, κοινωνική ερευνήτρια και την ενασχόλησή της με τα θέματα του φύλου και της φροντίδας, για τη σημασία που έχει η διεκδίκηση ενός πνεύματος κοινωνικής προστασίας για όλους, για αυτή τη μάχη ενάντια στον νεοφιλελευθερισμό. Παρ' όλα αυτά, αν και θα μου άρεσε να βάλω μια σκέψη και γι' αυτό, με αφορμή λίγο και την προηγούμενη απάντησή της, θα ήθελα να τη ρωτήσω κάτι που κάπως έτσι συζητήσαμε λίγο πριν ξεκινήσει και η κουβέντα, γιατί κατά τη γνώμη της οι βουλεύτριες, οι γυναίκες με ρόλους στην πολιτική που συμμετέχουν σε σχήματα κυβερνητικά ενδεχομένως στην Λατινική Αμερική, δυσκολεύονται ή τέλος πάντων έτσι κάπως το περιέγραψα, θα το εξηγήσει καλύτερα για εκείνη, να αυτοπροσδιοριστούν ως φεμινίστριες. Νομίζω είναι μια ενδιαφέρουσα συζήτηση που γεώνει τη θεωρητική πολιτική συζήτηση με την ίδια την εμπειρία.
Yeah, thank you. Coming back to the first point and this question that you mentioned now, I think that it is really necessary in order to be an inclusive, democratic, and pluralistic state in Latin America specifically, that we guarantee the rights of citizenship, and not only the formal rights, but the real right, because there is always a distance in our countries between the formal rights that you recognize and the real possibility to exercise your right in everyday life in different conditions. So to guarantee this right of citizenship, taking into account obviously the different dimension of inequality and the historical discrimination that women are suffering in Latin America. Just to give you a few numbers, if we see Latin America and the Caribbean today, for instance, if we regard a political representation, we only have one third, that is to say 30%, of women that are actively participating in decisions, political decisions in Latin America. So we have to improve this. We obviously have a wage gap of 30% also between the remuneration that a man has and the remuneration of the women in Latin America. And we also have problems with the participation in the labor market. Please remember that Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the informal economies, the most important informal economies that we have. Just to give you some numbers, in Peru, we were in Peru 3 days ago, and in Peru you have 85% of the population that are in the informal market. And you know, when we say informal market, that means no social protection at all, no rights at all. And if you regard this, the situation of women in Peru, they are almost every woman in Peru is in the informal market, so they have no access to social protection at all. That's really the context of Latin America that we have to take into account when we discuss the issues that you were asking some minutes ago. So, human development states, democracy, you all know this, require social inclusion, obviously. We require also the advancement of equality, the non-discrimination policies, and I think, and we in Claxo believe that feminist is the key issue to discuss all this topic, because feminist is a democratizing, pluralistic, diverse, and deeply dialogic movement that both from the individual and the collective perspective incorporates this intersectional approach of inequalities. That is an approach, an inclusive approach, and that the things that we are working for, that is to say, we want to achieve equality, we want to achieve societies that are more just, more equitable, more democratic. It is not possible if we do not include this feminist perspective, if we do not include this perspective and this deconstruction of patriarchal, of colonial, of racist and sexist powers that are in the states of Latin America and the Caribbean. We really need to include all these things together and not approaching them separately. That is the way that some of the states in Latin America are trying to do, but they approach these different categories separately and not all together. And I think this this is the specific contribution of feminists to the state and to the politics. This way of approaching in an intersectional way the different dimensions of inequality. And this is also the way to construct these new forms of view from the social and the public that are crucial for achieving these societies more democratic and so on. So this way of doing feminist politics, I repeat it, is based on giving a politicization of the domestic sphere and taking into account this domestic sphere as an important issue. The problem is I'm not reading. I'm trying to express myself without reading because she changed the questions. That's why, sorry if I'm doing more mistakes in English. Yeah. So, the central point is this question of politicizing the domestic sphere and giving the value, the specific value to the empathy, the care, and the organization of the works that happens in this domestic sphere. That obviously has a connection with what she was saying of the social reproduction theories. From a feminist perspective, we promote that the states recognize as central in their agendas and in their public policies the perspective of caring for life in at least three ways. Care for people, that is obvious. Care for the environmental, the earth, and all the things regarding to this, but also care for the well-being of the majority of the population. So we have to include this perspective in the things that we are debating around this relation between the state and the feminist theories. The aspiration is to recover the protection, the well-being, and the reproduction of life through care as an ethics that transforms the power relations in our society, that promotes development and more democracy. This resignification is based on the fact that care sustains the health of everyday life and is essential for well-being. But the real question here for me is, why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult that left parties, left movements, left people declare themselves as feminists? Because when I discuss with people from different parties in Latin America, left parties in Latin America, they have no difficulty to see I'm anti-capitalist, I'm anti-imperialist, I'm anti-colonialist, but they cannot say I'm feminist, or well, we have to discuss, maybe it can be in the future, not now. Why is it so difficult to include feminism as a real important perspective for the left? I really believe that there is no possibility to go further in the left proposal if we do not include these issues that the feminist is developing and studying and proposing, obviously in Latin America, but not also in Latin America. Because I also believe that societies, all the societies, owes a debt to feminism. They have a debt with feminism. And the left has an ethical and a political obligation to assume this political legacy to build a different society. I really, maybe we can discuss this in the open part of this session, why it is so difficult to declare yourself as a left person and a feminist person, a left party and a feminist party. Thank you very much.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ, Καρίνα. Ευχαριστώ πολύ που απάντησες και στη μικρή δεύτερη ερώτηση που πρόσθεσα. Νομίζω ότι, όπως πολύ εύστοχα σχολίασε, αυτό το οποίο συζητάμε πια είναι μια νέα οπτική για το φεμινισμό και τις διεκδικήσεις του, όπως αντίστοιχα και για τις διεκδικήσεις που αφορούν το περιβάλλον, που με κάποιο τρόπο ανακαταλαμβάνουν το πεδίο της πολιτικής και δεν αποτελούν μέρη του. Νομίζω αυτή είναι η νέα συνθήκη στην οποία συζητάμε για τα ζητήματα αυτά. Προχωράω στη δεύτερη ερώτηση προς την Άκητσα. Η κρίση της φροντίδας, η άτυπη εργασία, η οποία αναφέρθηκε και νωρίτερα από την Καρίνα, η επισφάλεια είναι ένα πεδίο, ένα έδαφος στο οποίο ενισχύονται όλες οι κυρίαρχες έμφυλες, ταξικές, φυλετικές ανισότητες που σχετίζονται με την σωματική υγεία και με την αναπηρία. Ποια είναι κατά τη γνώμη σου η συμβολή της οπτικής της θεωρίας της κοινωνικής αναπαραγωγής και ως προς το κομμάτι της διερεύνησης των πιστικών απαντήσεων για αυτή την πολύπλευρη κρίση που αντιμετωπίζουμε σήμερα?
Okay, thanks again for the question. Are there any progressive, just to reframe it a bit to be closer to the initial question, are there any progressive responses to the neoliberal abolition of social roles of the state as well as to the flourishing social and care crisis? The shortest possible answer would be dissocialization of reproductive labor. This Marxist feminist, substantially anti-capitalist demand proposes the unification of various struggles from the bottom up. It encompasses the struggles for a sustainable future, public and affordable healthcare, kindergartens and nursing homes for safe and socially conscious housing, for food security, for women's labor and reproductive rights, for safety at work, reduction of working time, for campaigns to unionize service sector workers in for-profit nursing homes, hospitals, and childcare centers. So, taken together, these claims are the tantamount to the demand for a massive reorganization of the relation of production and reproduction, for social arrangements that would enable people of every class, gender, sexuality, and color to combine social reproductive activities with well-remunerated, safe, and not less important, interesting work. While analyzing the relationship between neoliberalism and social reproduction, we should take into account that it simultaneously affects three spheres. First, the macro, world market and the world policies, then the meso, institutions, state, market, and family, and the micro, individual. By affecting these three levels simultaneously, neoliberalism successfully and necessarily relies on the so-called free choice ideology, which suggests that everything is possible with enough individual effort and personal entrepreneurial engagement. We all remember, I hope we all remember, the iconic statement of Margaret Thatcher, "There is no such thing as society, there are individual men and women, and their rough families. Therefore, ongoing care crisis arises from the neoliberal need of reconfiguration of reproduction, deepened by assigning the responsibility of care from state to individual initiative and charity. The point is, as critically emphasized by Emma Dowling, that helping others must be individual, voluntary, and informed by an ethics of charity or other forms of moral obligation, such as those conferred by kinship. This moral, individualist narrative suggests that what it must not be is public, that is, organized, managed, and funded collectively. And this dangerous individualism, i.e. moralization of care, was determined and critically elaborated by social reproduction theory. The second focus we might consider in our discussion of the relationship between the crisis and the social reproduction and the state is the role of the nuclear family in it. In the capitalist mode of production, social relations are necessarily based on exploitation and riddled with conflict. In order for the class relations thus established to survive in a bourgeois society, they, as well as the productive capacities they utilize, must be reproduced. One of the key units, not the only one, that ensures the reproduction of social relations and productive forces within capitalism is family. Despite the fact that the family represents ideological mystification and a political project, that not all families are the same, that the idea of men as providers is going and undergoing a serious crisis, and that not all families are even heterosexual, the legal and political project of familiarization has never been stronger. This is not to be ascribed simply to religion or traditionalist conservatism, but to the morals of the market, as expressed by Jessica White. What she means by that concept is a radical re-rolling back of the state and the neoliberal practice of outsourcing the burden of social responsibility to families. The morals of the market presuppose radical abolition of social roles of the state, reassigning them to the family as the supposedly only unit that is accountable for its sustenance of its members. Therefore, its moral role is to secure a shelter, a safe space, an isolated anti-social island that is supposed to protect us from all social crises and economic insecurity. Exactly in that line of argumentation, Richard Seymour notes, when society is either hostile or indifferent, when public provision is etiolated, when institutions of solidarity are shriveled and demoralized, the anti-social family can provide a range of services: free transport, help with spiraling debt, financial support against unemployment, care for grandchildren and elderly, or care in the event of illness. The family thus becomes a shelter, expected to accomplish immeasurable effort and to do it all out of love, because this is understood as naturally giving and necessarily moral sacrifice. Rather than having the state and the employers to ensure socially conscious and socially sustainable housing, available and free public transport, public healthcare and education, as well as community services and decent wages and pensions, the morals of the market takes on the role of the mediator between the state and the family and charges the family with all the social duties of the state, therefore making the family responsible for all the consequences of social crisis, bad living, and poverty. However, the social and reproductive capacities of family are not infinite. We are continuously witnessing not only the economic crisis, but social reproductive crisis as well. Systematic exploitations of individual and collective abilities for regeneration of people and relations between them, as well as the systematic care crisis. The last report of the European Parliament's member, Katalin Czech, explored the crisis that urban areas faced in the post-pandemic times. It determined that 80% of care work for family members in the European Union is done informally. Informal care workers are people providing continuous care for a partner, relative, or friend who needs assistance with personal care and everyday tasks. In other words, they are not paid professional caretakers or volunteers who can take care of others always out of love, religious or moral grounds, and in their own free time and at their own expense. The increase of informal care workers had been more pronounced since 2008 crisis, when the toxic cocktail of austerity policies and recession significantly destabilized the material and social rights of workers and the unemployed, and especially of the elderly, children, and chronically ill. To illustrate the extent of the global need for care work, just a couple of recent facts and numbers. In 2015, there were an estimated 2.1 billion people worldwide in need of care work, predominantly children and elderly. By 2030, as reported by the International Labour Organization, the total number is expected to reach 2.3 billion. Another consequence of the increasing erosion of social responsibilities of the state and the related commodification of reproductive labor is the growing number of the world's population that cannot access care. The already mentioned report by Katalin Czech notes that informal and unpaid labor in the EU is primarily performed, shocking news, by women. In fact, as much as 75% of its burden is carried by female, informal caretakers. The situation in other parts of the world is even more dire. Women and girls do more than 75% of unpaid care work in the world. They perform most chores in 89% of households, and 42% of women cannot secure paid jobs because they are busy with caregiving. So what might be social, reproductive feminist answers to the care crisis, besides already mentioned and noted unitary resistance to the market and its reproduction? Well, what we need for starters is that our work record should be judged in combination with our domestic labor and caregiving record. For instance, if you cannot demonstrate that you have cooked enough meals, cared for other living beings, and so on, your work CV will be judged poorly. If you took a step further and advocate, let's say, for a more radical communist abolition of the idea of family, which is encoded in the morals of the market, as I recently pointed out, where will this colon-type direction take us? Definitely not in the direction of abolishing close and intimate relationships negating the importance of care for vulnerable family members or destroying the concept of mutual life altogether. In fact, it would do exactly the opposite. The idea of abolishing nuclear family calls for expanding, socializing, and denaturalizing current forms of life-making, care work, and reproduction. One of the main goals in that direction is insisting on deprivatizing care and, in words of Sophie Lewis, imagining a world in which all people are cared for by many by default. As we're witnessing capitalism period of social crisis since 2008, along with the cutting of historically gained material and social rights, with sharpening class polarization, with the permanent environmental crisis, migrant health and geopolitical crisis, we are actually entering a dangerous zone that can give rise to fascist movements. Such movements recognize the social crisis, but they aim to shift the blame for it away from the capitalist system, looking instead for scapegoats. Immigrants, blacks, Jews, self-confident and independent women, LGBT people, Roma people, and others. Outlandish conspiracy theories are conjured up, designed to deflect attention away from the social and economic responsible for the crisis. As these attacks escalate, we will have to give an urgent answer to a question: who will fight these dangerous tendencies? Shall we? The fight will have to be led by all who struggle in the interests of the oppressed and exploited, united by the question of reproduction. From working class organizations and trade unions, feminist and womenist organizations who defend the right to abortion, to defenders of democratic rights, to those who fight against racism and anti-immigrant violence, and who fight for a sustainable future. Well, let's hope so, that this will actually unite us.
Thank you so much. Συνεχίζουμε με την αγγελική, κλείνοντας και αυτό το δεύτερο κύκλο στο σειρά. Αγγελική, μιας και έχεις κάνει και επιτόπια δουλειά για το ζήτημα, θα ήθελα να σε ρωτήσω κάτι που και εμένα μου φαίνεται πολύ, ενδιαφέρει πολύ και εμένα. Κατά τη γνώμη σου, παραμένει ο ελληνικός στρατός μια επιδραστική ιδεολογική δομή και ιδιαίτερα σε θέματα που σχετίζονται με την κατασκευή της αρενοπότητας, την ιδεολογία για τη σεξουαλικότητα, όλα αυτά τα θέματα?
Yes, let's go back to the army. First, I have to say that I'm gonna be fast on the evidences here. But what I'm presenting now is results from my PhD on suicide during compulsory military service in Greece. So conscripts who have to do this service, they kill themselves. I'm not going to talk about suicide, but I'm going to focus on this gender reproduction and gender roles in the barracks. And I'm going to start with a disclaimer. And I told that before, like a military institution in Greece is an important institution, highly involved in political life. There are a lot of political discourses. They tend to express their opinion. They also reproduce more, let's say, traditional or maybe conservative ideas about religion, about nationality, about borders and stuff. So, in the name of this national secret and this unevitable, I will come back to this unavoidable, sorry, this is a French unavoidable preparation to the war against our neighbors. military institutions tend to hold the monopoly of their affairs and management of their affairs. So what's happening in the Greek barracks? We have to look the conscript, the compulsory military service in Greece as a total institution, as Goffman suggested. It's been years now, I know it's highly criticized. Let's not talk about the theory, let's see the effect that this institution has on these people. You have to imagine for a minute that, like, you know that from, since you grow up in Greece as a male, you have to get into the barracks. So you have to spend some months among military people under a military hierarchy. It's really complicated to avoid it. I mean, we have people around who haven't been there, but they made a lot of effort in this place. And once they arrive in the doors of the institutions, they're being directly deprived by any type of thinking, making, practicing, appropriating their bodies. The whole aspects of their social life belongs to the institution. So there is a really hard and complicated depersonalizing process that happens to those men when they get into the barracks. And once this process happening in the first 40 days, more or less, this militarization as the institution call it, we have a new phase of introducing a socialization on weapons by practicing on weapons, using weapons, physical exercise and endurance of physical activities, and then of course by, I've said that before, now I'm going to say it out loud, as a segregation, as a gender segregation, taking men away from whatever seems to be feminine, feminized, that way it's a term, like all the family away from their mothers. People I interviewed, they said, like, these young boys, they hide under the skirt of their mothers. So there's a diabolization, immediate diabolization of feminine or feminities in their elements. And this process is not an easy one. We're talking a lot about harassment, about hazing, about physical violence, about obeying orders, about not having access to contacts with civilian life, not having access to journals. You cannot have participation in political movements or activities, whatever it takes. You have a punishment system, which is like basically the deprivation of going out of the army. So these people, when they get into the barracks, the men I met, I'm going to talk about them because now it's 12 months, and I don't know, maybe it has changed. When they get into the society, they have to lose, they have to be submitted in a diminution of their gender role and their previous socialization on the male conventional identity. I'm talking about male heterosexual people because the army starts again with the purification, as I said. Trans people don't get into the army, homosexuals up to 2000, they were forced to have a really complicated body control to be sure that they're not going to let homosexual men get into the barracks. And then, so they have this reduction, as you can call it, diminution of the gender male role, because people, they get into the barracks, they already had socialization before, they had a life. They had a little bit of an experience what it has to be like a dominant male person in civilian war. And then through this violence, through these exercises, the army tends to masculinize them, to make them more virile, more brave, more victorious, more fast, more athletic, ready to use the weapons, to go to war, also to be more autonomous, to make decisions, through a process of submission and being obeisant, to obey, yes, you can use the verb. And then when I looked closer to what's happening to these individuals, I observed that they tend to create these male gangs, so male conscripts, they tend to be together, and in order to survive under these really complicated situations, I have to say here, sometimes the food, you cannot eat it, it's really, you have to live with 30 or 40 people in the same room, you cannot have access, as I said, to journals and activities, so they tend to gather together in order to survive, and they collectivize the experience. But then again, it works the same. They reproduce the ideological mechanism of the army, excluding all people who are fats, silly, whatever they call them, pussies, and I mean, I have a list about that. Let's be politically correct. It's about feminized or considered to be feminine people, homosexuals or people that they think they're close to not the conventional male identity, and then they're going to use the same violence the army gave them as a knowledge toward these populations, not only by exclusion, but we're talking about harassment. And I don't know if I'm online, but I don't know also if people listening to me. Let's see what the consequences will be if I say that out loud. 2 years before, there was a military officer ordered the rape of a conscript towards his own conscript. So then a gang of males who raped a person. And let's say it out loud, at the same time that are happening like here. Complicated things in the army that are like normal and acceptable. So through these male gangs that they create, they tend to experience again a new advanced role of this male conventional heteronormative role and identity by selecting or not who they're going to be the comrades of the barracks, and then experience violence, strengthen the monopoly of the weapons, and then to do this segregation, the production of this patriarchal hierarchy. And let's say here again, that also out loud, most of the feminicides happen from people who know how to use violence. I'm coming back to this monopoly, masculinized male monopoly on the arms and the weapons and the instruments, as Paula Tabet mentioned, like feminist materialism analyst and anthropologist. And so these people, when they go back to real life, to among civilians, even if participation in the society is really contradictory, the people I interviewed, they tend to say, I will go just to finish up with that, it's just a phase in my life, I will do that to do it, I don't have nothing to gain on my masculinity on that. But at the end of the day, they go back into civilian life and they have a monopoly on those elements I suggested before. So I'm going to stop the misery, and I'm going to, because I think it's not really miserable. Today I woke up with political melancholy, happens to me. I'm going to be better, maybe later. So I'm going to just open the discussion on that to relate it a little bit to what I mentioned before and what has been said today and yesterday about this, what do we do? What do we do? Are we going to keep the military service? Are we going to stop it? Which state is going to take the responsibility to say, let's stop it? It's not unavoidable, as I said before. But other people would say, it's a little bit complicated because we're under the threat of another nation or other nations close to us. And then, of course, we cannot think, we have a big debate. I don't have any answer to that, and I'm sorry, but let's discuss it collectively. Shall we let women get into the barracks? What does it mean to have a woman in the barracks, in professional positions? Is it equality? Is it reproducing the discrimination of women? Is it letting those people experience again and again new tastes and new tastes of violence? I mean, thinking about male colleagues mostly. Are we giving the opportunity to those people to have something to live with? I mean, getting away from this domestic labor life. Are we giving them the opportunity to be themselves, to be in an emancipatory process? And then, let's put like the geopolitical question in a bigger way. I'm not sure I can answer that. Let's think together. So, if we look a little closer to who decides for whom, okay? It's going to be a male monopoly also in geopolitics, in ambassadors, and people who try to make avoid war. So it's about men preparing and deciding for war, and women who are subjected to survive against all odds. You should read also Athanasiou book about pneumonia and feminist resistance on that. But we also have to think about how these tiny small institutions tend to extend their power and become at a micro level the mechanism of reproduction Reproduction, thank you very much. French brain and Greek nationality. So we have to think about security and the definition of security again, because what we listened before is more than a social security than we need, not a militarized one. And then again, we have to define it about equality, access to all people, and health, money, surviving, solidarity and stuff. And then I'm gonna put that also in perspective, thinking about the military. I'm going really fast here with this assumption, but I feel like doing it. I feel we trust each other now. I think we have to think again about how these institutions that continue and continue again and again through this year, existed by these inequalities, through these inequalities, and reproducing them, how do they produce also, let's say, complicated ideologies as the masculinist ones are happening in the world. I mean, many there around the world, they claim to have the weapons, they want to be in power again because they feel being threatened because of those feminist approaches we presented. So I hope it was not like an intellectual jump, I think, but thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Angeliki. Thank you all. A huge thanks to our translators today for making this conversation accessible to everyone. I think we have some time for one or two or maybe three questions.
Η Αγγελική έβαλε την ερώτηση που ακριβώς ετοιμαζόμουν να το βάλω. Μόνο που επειδή εκτός από το στρατό είναι και η αστυνομία ένας από τους καταπιεστικούς κατασταλτικούς μηχανισμούς του κράτους, εγώ δεν θα ήθελα, και θα ήθελα από την Αγγελική αλλά και από όλες σας να απαντήσετε στο ερώτημα, όχι να μας το βάλετε εσείς να απαντήσουμε εμείς. Δηλαδή, ποια είναι η επιθέση σας, να θηλυκοποιήσουμε το στρατό και την αστυνομία, να χρησιμοποιήσουμε, δηλαδή να προσπαθήσουμε μέσω αυτού να μετασχηματίσουμε και το κράτος, γιατί αυτός είναι ο στόχος μας και δεν μπορούμε να το μετασχηματίσουμε αν δεν βάλουμε και την έμφυλη διάσταση, ή να τα παρέσουμε όλα και να τα ανάψουμε σε μέρα, μαζί με τους άλλους, όλους τους άλλους.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the interesting panel. My name is Hanna and I'm from Finland. I'm looking things from Nordic perspective, and it was said here that state is a patriarchal institution. I oppose it a bit because it can be or it can be not. And actually, Nordic model in Nordic states, I think, state in many ways women's best friend as it is. Providing accessible child care, elderly care, social benefits, pensions, public and affordable health care, including sexual and reproductive health, and we have the progressive taxation, which is taking money from rich men and giving it to the poor women as a function. So I a bit oppose to the basic idea that state is a patriarchal institution. Of course, this is kind of like a practical thinking that I'm doing here also as a woman. But then I would like to say that in Finland we did structural renewal in family leaves. So now we give equal family leaves both men and women and for different kind of families, no matter same-sex or single mother family or whatever. But the problem is that now the legislation is equal, but people are not willing to use the benefits equal. Men are not willing to stay home with small children, and women are not willing to give the man a chance to stay home with the child. So state is trying to push for the more equal division of unpaid care work, but people are not willing to use the opportunity. So this is a like a broader question. I think it's a cultural question also. But then I would like to comment the question of feminism and the left parties. I think the intersectional feminism is core in all progressive left parties, or it cannot be a progressive left parties if the intersectional feminism is really not on board. But my question is, does it matter whether the parties call themselves feminists or not? Because I know that the word feminism is very hard for many people. Like, I declare myself as a feminist, that's not a problem for me, but it is a problem for many. So I think it's more important to have the feminist policies inside the party programs and politics. And it's not so important if they call themselves feminist parties. Or how do you see it? Because I don't think that if the word feminism is so scary, do we need to use it, or is it important to have the progressive feminist policies and politics on board of the parties?
Inga Johannesson from Denmark, transformed Denmark. And I will restrict myself to a very concrete issue, and that is the issue of how it's raised women in the army. Is this a feminization of the army, or what is it? Because what we have experienced is that with the war in Ukraine and with the NATO demands, there has been an increasing, of course, increase of defense expenses, and one of the issues is that women are going to, the army is going to be opened up for women, and the government is calling this equality. This is a fulfillment of equality. And all the parties supported this, and this idea. Now, in this concrete situation, I would not call it equality or fulfillment of equality. It obviously is a way to promote militarization in my eyes, because it is demanded from the partners of the Danish government. Yes, demanded, but I think that in other countries you have the same issue raised. And I do think it's a difficult issue. You cannot always say that this is a feminization of the army. I really think that we have to think about that, because what is the army? And you have talked about exactly what the army can do to people, to the conscripts, to the male conscripts. Yes. So I think this is really something, and it's not only in this particular situation, but it's obvious to me, it is using women to promote the militarization. But it may be different in other situations. Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ. Θέλω να κάνω ένα σχόλιο και θέλω να ακούσω και τον κοινό της απόψης σας, γιατί για μένα αυτό το πράγμα είναι η καρδιά γενικά των φεμινιστικών αγώνων στο σήμερα και απαντάει και στο τι κράτος θέλουμε και σε τι κατεύθυνση μπορεί να μετασχηματιστεί το κράτος και πώς μπορούν να ενδυναμωθούν οι αγώνες και τι μπορεί με τι περιεχόμενο μπορούμε να γεμίσουμε τις φεμινιστικές μας ουτοπίες. Και είναι ακριβώς το ζήτημα της οικογένειας και η θεσμοποίηση των συντροφικών σχέσεων. Αναφέρθηκε πριν από τη Χάνα ότι, ας πούμε, στις σκανδιναβικές χώρες υπάρχει και maternal leave και paternal leave. Αυτό και εξήγησε, ας πούμε, ότι τελικά και αυτό δεν δουλεύει. Αρχικά στη συντριπτική πλειονότητα των χωρών δεν έχουμε καν αυτό και η αριστερά ακόμα συνεχίζει να ζητάει μόνο μητρική άδεια και γενικά συνεχίζουν να φαντασιωνόμαστε ένα θηλυκοποιημένο κοινωνικό κράτος και να ζητάμε την επέκταση ενός θηλυκοποιημένου κοινωνικού κράτους. δεν δουλεύει αυτό και δεν θα δουλέψει και θα συνεχίζουν οι άντρες να μην θέλουν να κρατάνε το παιδί ή οτιδήποτε άλλο, γιατί ακριβώς δεν επερωτάμε το τι σημαίνει οικογένεια, τι σημαίνει γονεϊκότητα, γιατί ακριβώς και τα φεμινιστικά κινήματα, παρόλο που η θεωρία μας έχει δώσει πάρα πολλά όπλα και μεγάλο πλούτο, δεν μιλάνε για αυτά τα πράγματα. Τουλάχιστον το φεμινιστικό κίνημα στη χώρα μου, καταλαβαίνω ότι μέχρι στιγμής κάνει έναν αγώνα υπεράσπισης δικαιωμάτων και σίγουρα είναι ένα μεγάλο και δύσκολο αγώνα ενάντια στην έμφυλη βία, αλλά δεν αγγίζει το ζήτημα της οικογένειας. Δεν αγγίζει το ζήτημα ότι γενικά δεν κάνουμε μια κουβέντα καθόλου για νέα μοντέλα γονεϊκότητας, πώς μπορούν αυτά να θεσμοποιηθούν, πώς πρέπει να υπάρχει μια θεσμική διάκριση μεταξύ συμβολέων γονεϊκότητας και συμβολέων συμβίωσης, γιατί επίσης αυτά είναι λαθισμένα και επίσης εκεί γίνεται ένα μεγάλο ζήτημα. Συνεχίζει πλάσει το φεμινιστικό κίνημα και τα κινήματα της LGBTQI κοινότητας επί της ουσίας αναπαράγουν πάνω κάτω το ίδιο μοντέλο. Είναι αυτό που ονομάζουμε ομοκανονικότητα. Συνεχίζουμε δηλαδή με το I, him and the baby makes three. Αν δεν αρχίσουμε να συζητάμε για αυτά, τα οποία μπορούν όντως να αποκρισταλωθούν, νομίζω, και στο θεσμικό επίπεδο, εγώ θεωρώ ότι δεν μπορεί τίποτα να αλλάξει και δεν πιστεύω καν. Δηλαδή, εγώ δεν είμαι ποτέ από αυτές που μιλάω μόνο για τις utopίες. Εγώ με ενδιαφέρουν πράγματι τα απόλυτο σήμερα. Δεν θεωρώ καν ότι αυτό που περιγράφω τώρα είναι τόσο ριζοσπαστικό. Πιστεύω ότι όντως έχει έρθει η ώρα να το συζητήσουμε και πραγματικά διερωτώ με γιατί το φεμινιστικό κίνημα, τα φεμινιστικά κίνηματα δεν μιλάνε για αυτά τα πράγματα. Πραγματικά.
Annika, I have a short question to you. Could you hear me?
A little bit more.
So? Okay. Annika, my question is following. You spoke about unpaid reproductive work. More than 75%, I understood. And the strategy could be the deprivatization. One strategy of the deprivatization is the financialization of the care, especially elderly care. What do you think about this tendency? Thank you.
Last question, because it's for Galina, one for all of you. One of the things I like the most about the feminist theory and practice is the internationalism and how we feel as the struggles of the feminists all around the world are our struggles. In my country, in Spain, we saw the struggle of the feminists in Argentina fighting for the abortion as a one particular fight. Cristina said yes, it was, and we were crying when we were in Argentina. So my question for you, the first question, Galina, is if this movement in Argentina has changed something in the perception of the left of how valuable the feminist movement is, particularly for the young women, because it was very young women in Argentina who did an amazing victory. And just only finalizing by saying that for me it's important that Norway, Sweden and Finland are the less unequal countries in the world. And that is significant. I think it's really very important. But nevertheless, patriarchy is going beyond that. So I was also happy today to see a picture in a football team between Sweden and Spain. And the national teams put a banner together says, "Acabó, it's over, no more sexual harassment. Our struggle is a common struggle." I like that, and I wanted to show it. Thank you.
Maybe you can start.
Okay. I'm not going to start with the first question because it's a complicated one, and I'm going to start from the question of feminization of the army. Thank you very much. You basically answered. For me, also, the definition of feminization is not a proper term. Okay, it's like an academic term that we use in order to describe tolerance, tolerating and accepting women in barracks. For me, also, the term of mixity is a problematic one because we're talking a lot among scholars who work on feminist approaches of the armies and stuff. We use also mixity. Mixity doesn't mean equality, feminization either. But
I'm sure it doesn't mean emancipation, in no case. So my question is, do we need, what's feminization, what's the army, do we need armies, do we need feminization? I feel like the contributions of feminist approaches on that is that they highly criticize the army in different levels, and they have the, activists also, they put out a lot of evidence about violence, career stopping for women, problematic situations, not access to higher hierarchy roles. But to connect this one with the first one, question I was asked, I don't feel it's something changing in that. Even if we look at the case of Israel, when we have this mixed, like both genders armies, we will keep having like the same ideology, patriarchal. It's still reducing. And as you said, sometimes, from my point of view, just to position myself on the discussion, from my point of view, it's just a new experiment. We just let another sphere of male domination happening and happening and happening again without being able to stop it. So about this feminization of the state, I really like to hear it. Thank you very much. I really like also that there are a lot of emotions when we talk about feminism in the state. We're warmed up. So my response to that is, I'm going to be fair, they have to lose some privileges. We talked about before the resistance to making institutional states and relations more equal, not more. Let's start with more, but equal. They have to lose some privileges. They have the men and dominating figures, conventional identities of masculinity, and other types of masculinities. Oh, maybe too much, I know. They have to lose some of their privileges. It's not going to happen elsewhere. And that's a contribution of feminist approaches. That's a contribution also for the small, let's say, the small struggles we give. And it's interesting because when it comes to the family and familiarism, it's really connected to the army discussion and the conscripts and the life in the barracks and the good woman to be the good wives of militaries and stuff. And I'm caring also about nowadays because I don't feel this discussion has been openly discussed. And I'm going to criticize openly also the masculinization of anti-militarist movements. It's most the case, it's about men, and some women who bring themselves into groups, activist groups, they tend to be minoritized or ignored by other movements. And then you talked about this internationalization. Yes. What are we going to do with it? I don't know what we're going to do with that. Yes. So that will give me the opportunity to come back to my first. Because I think there's a key over there. We have to think all together, from Argentina to Greece to Croatia to whatever we feel like to be creating. Like, not a utopia. We need a utopia. We need a utopian world, but we need also practices, which is complicated. And I'm not the person to say you should do that, and that will be emancipatory. We need sharing and we need spaces to exchange internationally. And then about militarized police, militarized institutions, because it's not only the police. In France, you have municipal police, which is highly militarized after the terrorist attacks 2015-16. In France, we have also the example of militarization of the institutions in public. All the answers we tend to give in social problems are more and more militarized, either through the enforcement of these institutions, either through the ideologies they produce. Personally, to answer to your question, my first comrade who took the microphone and asked me something, I'm talking to you. You don't listen to me. It's okay, fine. I'm going to give you an answer, if you want. It's okay, I'm not going to go and collage your internet. For me, there's no emancipation if there's no abolishment of the armies. And I know I go deep enough, and I know I don't have the good questions, the good answers, but if we don't stop the ideology of militarism and this process of militarization of the society, we will never have equality in the world. We will never have equal rights. We will never have a woman being in power. We will never have this magic world that we dream of. I think the army is the key, and we struggle hard in left parties to discuss about it and take hard and complicated positions saying we need to go furthermore. And then I'm going to turn myself to the more conventional and conservative response. According to the geopolitical situations, we cannot stop tomorrow having conscription, we cannot stop tomorrow having women in the barracks. We cannot do that tomorrow, but we have to process on that and work on that to more, let's say, peaceful societies, but not as like kind, feminized, smooth, pacifist ones, with the struggles we need through the position of anti-militarism more than the pacifism with hugs and kisses coming from others, the babies and stuff. So for me, there's a core in the discussion here. I'm sorry I don't have the answers. I hope we discuss one day we find all together one. Sorry if I'm not loud. Thank you.
Okay, so there were no questions, I think, directed to me personally, but I will try to cover some of the questions that the audience raised. Maybe I'll start with the comment made by a comrade from Finland about the word of feminism. I think that is really historically and because of the future, important to stick to the term feminism. It has like this, I would say, historical and symbolical baggage which we need to defend. And to impose it tomorrow as something that is really needed. It's not a kind of identity reference, but as a politics that we actually strive for. So I wouldn't be that much polite, and we frame it in some maybe more polite terms, just because, let's say, we're in a more radical setting, and hopefully, at least here, we can defend feminist term as something that we need in the future. Then the question that Angelina raised about the family and the problem, I would say, about the conservatism in leftist movements or even in feminism. When I say familiarization, that really means that somehow in leftist movements, the concept of, allow me to say, marriage, monogamy, having children, and all this care work, voluntary, love labor, is being introduced as something really that everybody should strive for. I'm not sure that this is a communist or socialist answer to the problems we have. I know that it's maybe going in a stronger direction, but this is more as a kind of intrusion or just a shock, just to move direction from the reformism and everyday answers to the problems we have. I think that the question of family is really important, not just as an add-on, as something aside. So we will have a panel on feminism, and then we'll talk about gender as race, and then we'll talk about whatever. No, I think it is really crucial to understand that the complexity of our lives are somehow riddled on more different levels at the same time. So I think when we speak about environmental crisis, militarization, care work, the question of, numbers of women in formal politics, we have to also talk about family, how it is being reproduced, the division of labor, the emotional engagement between the partners, and of course sexual relations and everything that is there on the table. So yes, I think that is rather strange that this, I would call it a bit conservative flashback. It's really different from 60s and 70s, but familiarization is definitely there on the table. And the third thing, maybe regarding the question about the informal labor, which I think also relates to the question of the comrade from Finland, I think that it's really important to be paid to have a kind of even trade unionism that is supported. This is really a necessity. But I think this is a kind of a short-term plan. What we always need while advocating for that is something on a long term. That means that we want to talk about labor that is more socialized and less commodified, that we need the different division of labor in reproduction and so on. But of course, we won't sit aside and leave women die day by day because of the informal labors. And just a last bit on the question of wars. I'm not the expert, but during the Second World War, we in Yugoslavia had an anti-fascist women's movement, which was probably the one, not probably, by numbers, the biggest one, even bigger than the Russia could imagine. And it was an anti-fascist war recruiting. So when somebody asks me about the feminist answers to war, if we are fighting fascists, yes, I'm there with you. They're fighting with us. But if we're speaking about imperialist wars, I think that this is a big difference. And we should acknowledge that, especially, if I may say, in terms of this nomenclature and maybe bad wording when you're not so easily speaking about yourself as feminist, there is always another point. You know, instrumentalizing the feminism when you have, I don't know, Angela Merkel or Maggie Thatcher. They call themselves feminists. No, thank you. So let's speak about that also. It's not just hard to say I'm feminist, but there is again on the table instrumentalization of feminist struggle that we also should handle. And not to mention these like neo-fascist feminist movements today, especially in the alt-right movement. So, yes.
So I will be very brief and try to address the two first questions. The first one was Spain is a patriarchal institution. I think it is the historic origin of the state is patriarchal. We can have some examples, maybe like Finland, different forms of states that are evolving, trying to go in another way. But when I see the states in the world, they are patriarchal. They are patriarchal institutions. I'm sorry, but I disagree with your point of view. That doesn't mean that it cannot change. We can change. We want to change the state. But for me, it is still a patriarchal institution. The second one, does it matter if the progressive movements or progressive parties or left parties call themselves feminists? For me, yes, absolutely. It's not a secondary characteristic, it's not a secondary issue, it's a central issue. And the question for me will be, why it is so difficult for the parties, for the movements in the left to say we are or we were from a feminist perspective, sorry. Why? Fear, maybe. Preconcept, I don't know, but there is real a difficult, and for me it is absolutely important. Why to hide it? Why do we need to hide if we really believe in a feminist conception of life, politics, and so on? Why to hide it? I don't know. It was also mentioned maybe it is more important or more relevant to do progressive feminist policies than declare yourself or your party or your movement as feminist. Yeah, I believe in progressive feminist policies, but also to say we are working from a feminist perspective. Why not? Why? I cannot understand the people who tell me, no, let's see, no, it's not the moment to say that we are feminists. It's not the moment to say that we are going to implement feminist public policy. I really cannot understand. Please, if someone can explain this to me. And then, Marga, your question about the movement, the feminist movement in Argentina, is absolutely crucial. It was now we are in a different moment when we talk about feminist movement in Latin America because of this starting point in Argentina, because it was only a starting point that then was extended to all the region. Now we have what we call the Marea Verde, was started in Argentina, but now it's in all the Latin American and Caribbean region. And I think that this kind of movement, how you say in English, interpel, no, how you say interpela, todo eso, todo eso, to the other political movements. And they are putting some issues in the agenda. Obviously, you have also some issues of this agenda that are being discussed or used by the right. But this is the conflict and the tension, and we have to address it. I do not believe that we have to hide the things. We have to address the things, the conflict and the tension. And thank you.
Thank you all. It's been very rich and very inspiring, I think, today. And I think now we have to wrap it up somehow. The next session begins at 3:30, something like that. 15, okay, 3:15, let's be sharp. Thank you so much, everyone. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ όλους, όλες. Καλή συνέχεια και καλό διάλειμμα. Thank you.